as she said, my name's Erin, and I went on a Carleton program. It was a sociology and anthropology program, but there was also an environmental aspect of it in which we traveled throughout the jungle, and that's kind of why I decided to be an environmental studies major, actually. So I guess I'll be the first to say that I have never been a very worldly person until recently. This winter actually was when I studied abroad, so I just got back. Until this winter, I have actually never traveled outside of the United States, except for I went to Mexico for spring break, my senior year of high school, so I don't know if that really counts. But my decision to go to Guatemala was a pretty radical one for me, considering my lack of international travel experience, and I really honestly had no idea what I was getting myself into. I just wanted to evade the cold Minnesota winter and improve my Spanish, and that was all I had in mind. So I guess one of the first things that was really interesting for me was seeing the living conditions that I was going to be staying in with my homestay. I really had no idea. You can call me naive. I don't know. I really didn't know that I was going to be living in a house with such humble living conditions. I had never before seen a house like this, let alone lived in one. There was very limited access to electricity. I think only my room had one light bulb that sometimes worked. There were dirt floors, water supply was low, and we had a tin roof. So I found myself immediately reacting to the situation. I felt pity for my home family, my host family, that they had to live in these conditions. And I found myself thinking their situation would be so much better if they had a tile floor, if they had electricity, if there was always water, if they had this, if they had that, so on and so forth. And I knew that a huge challenge was ahead of me, adjusting to the situation. But naturally, after a short amount of time, I began to realize that there is a value to living simply, and that these are people too. They need the same things that I do, they want the same things that I do, and I grew accustomed to living a simpler lifestyle. What I thought was once a so clear-cut boundary between poor and privilege became kind of blurry for me, because I had initially deemed my homestay living conditions as poor, and I had felt bad for my family because they were poor. But then after a while, I really couldn't imagine calling a place that felt so warm and loving and like a home to me a poor place to live. I was really confused about these boundaries, and I was trying to figure out why, as an American, I was associating more material possession with happier lifestyle or happier living situation or better living situation. I found myself further confronted with similar issues when our group traveled to the Selva Lacandona in Mexico. And we visited a Lacandon Indian community called Naha. Basically, prior to the discovery in 1940s of the Lacandon, they were a very simple, living, substance farming community of these Indians in the forest, and they farmed milpas to sustain themselves, and milpas are small plots of land, and they lived in thatched roof huts. And in the 1960s, logging companies created roads to gain access to the depths of the forest where the Lacandon were. And this invasion forever changed their lives, because basically their lifestyle transitioned from simple farming to a desire to make money, and capitalism inevitably trickled its way into their lives. And the Lacandon started trying to make money by selling crafts and goods to visiting outsiders and the various logging companies that would come in. Upon entering the community, I couldn't help but feel saddened at how much the outside influence of the West and logging companies coming in had impacted the culture of the people. From the tunic-clad, long-haired, forest-dwelling Lacandon of the past to the Western-dressed, cell phone-bearing Lacandon of today, I couldn't help but feel that they had experienced a great culture loss. I found myself feeling angry that these once, I guess you would say, primitive forest people had been handed over to the money-hungry ways of the West. And I found myself feeling this way for a few days. But after a while, I had a very important conversation with a volunteer from Navalone, which is an organization that works to express the felt need of the Lacandon. They work directly with people of the community. And during a conversation that her and I had, she made me question these feelings that I was having. She proposed the idea that perhaps the new way of life in Naha wasn't so bad. And I was kind of surprised by this. And she suggested that change and development in the community was possibly for the better, and she cited the example of women's rights. Prior to the Western influence and the outsiders coming in and imposing their views and the way that their lives run, the Lacandon had obviously been confined to their own community in the forest, and one of their marriage traditions was that men can choose as many wives as they want, and women, with or without their consent, could be married off at ages as young as 8. So, although this was a cultural tradition, it was not necessarily in the best interest for all involved, particularly the women. And today, the women of the Lacandon women in Naha are becoming educated. They're marrying by choice, and marriage is monogamous. So, women actually have more freedom today after these changes have taken place and after the development that has occurred. So, the point in case here is I began to question why we naturally feel inclined to think that a shift in cultural tradition is a loss, or why it is sad. And I questioned whether or not culture is static, or can it change with the times? And furthermore, how does development affect cultural change and cultural shift? What influence does it play? This is a picture of a bald Shea ceremony, and I think that the questions I just asked, a lot of the questions that I just presented are very, very difficult to answer, and possibly not, they can't be answered. So even though I didn't ever still not have found the answers to these questions, I do believe I found some clarity and truth during a day spent with the Naha Lacandon themselves. This is a bald Shea ceremony. It's a religious gathering in which all the men of the community come. And our group was graciously invited to partake in this event, which is very sacred. And I was able to meet with and converse with many of the local men of the community, the young men especially. And as conversation ensued and ideas were exchanged, I became so bold as to ask some of the younger boys why they chose to contradict their traditional hairstyles, the long hairstyles, why they chose to cut their hair, why they chose to wear Western clothing. And their answer was so obvious and so honest. They told me that they wanted to dress in jeans and polos and have short hair because it's a more practical way to present yourself in the modern working world of today. They said to enter the workforce, it would be a little bit difficult if they were wearing their white tunic and had their long, primitive hairstyles and didn't wear shoes to get a job. And they said that they were happy that the change had brought them cell phones, technology, and internet, amongst other things, so that they could have access to the world around them. And I mean, who wouldn't want to have these basic amenities that we in America take for granted? These people weren't sad about the changes going on in Naha. They were excited about the opportunities that the change had presented. So the goal of my presentation is not to answer the difficult questions that I've presented. Basically, these questions may never be answered, as we know. And before making assumptions or placing judgment, I ask you to take a step back and question your thoughts and feelings and reconsider. Prior to my trip in Guatemala, my eyes were closed and I was unaware of the major world issues going on, and especially in very complex issues of development and conservation and growth in communities. So basically, throughout the journey, I had a lot of experiences and I was constantly exposed to new situations, and some were wonderful, exciting, as you can see here. Some were new and challenging. And I guess overall, the wonderful connections I made with the people during my time in Guatemala and Mexico have taught me to open up my heart and my mind to new ideas and to always think before making any conclusions about anything. So what this experience abroad has inspired me to do is basically take everything I learned from studying abroad and apply it to my daily life. And I challenge all of you to do this too. And I think studying abroad is an absolutely incredible experience, and I wouldn't change it for a thing. Thank you.